At this time, we're going to transition into our next session titled Keys to Leading a Great Dairy Workforce. Our speaker, Richard Stup, leads the Agricultural Workforce Development Program within Cornell University's College of Agriculture and Life Sciences and the Dyson School of Applied Economics and Management. He leads educational programs in human resource management and conducts applied research into labor challenges facing the agricultural industry. His focus is on leadership development and regulatory compliance at the farm level. Before joining Cornell, Richard practiced as an organization development consultant, served as a senior leader in farm credit, was an extension specialist with Penn State, and worked in the feed industry. He earned his doctorate from Penn State in the field of workforce education and development, including research into human resource management on employee organizational commitment. Richard, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Teresa. And it's good to be with everyone here today. Really excited about having the chance to talk with you today about this topic of leading a great dairy workforce. It's something I'm really excited and passionate about. And bear with me just a second. I want to move my screen around a little bit to get on the same page with you. Okay, so keys to leading a great dairy workforce. So first of all, I'm going to start with the big picture, the wide view, and that is lead your business. And we'll dig into that in more detail. But then lead your team, a little bit more narrow focus onto the people that you work with on a regular basis. But then in the tightest focus, we're going to move to lead yourself, because especially in this time, with all the stresses that we have in this new era that we're working in, you got to take time to lead yourself. We all do, and it's become very, very clear. So first off, lead your business. And what does that mean? Well, a lot of things change through the course of the life of a business. And when I'm showing you this graph, I want you to look at the vertical axis there, where it's the size and complexity of the business from small to large. The horizontal axis is the age of the organization. This is not a specific number of years. It's just new to more mature, because that can change. And this graph was developed and originally published in Harvard Business Review and pertains to entrepreneurial businesses, but really it applies to all types of small businesses, including farms. I've shared this with lots of farms and with other businesses like veterinary practices as they grow. And this cycle is very familiar to a lot of people. You'll notice that first stage of the line as it goes up begins really. It doesn't even start at the very left at the beginning, because every business that's an entrepreneurial business starts out as an idea first in someone's mind, and then over time, as that business starts to develop and become something more than an idea, something for real, it begins to grow from nothing to something, and that's where we got that existence point. And then we move to survival, where okay, we're actually producing something, or we've actually got a customer, and we're starting to grow the business until, if possible, if things go well, we begin to have some early success, and that's that next stage. Note that not every business is going to survive. That's why that stage is called that, and not every business moves to that early success. Some fall out. But we possibly have some early success and some growth, and we begin to climb, and wow, we get some rapid growth because this business has started to figure things out and be successful. And ultimately, we get to maturity, where the business is kind of peaked in terms of its sales and growth, and number of employees, and so forth. And then there's a turning point, or there's the decision point. Which way will it go? And in your business, and you can view this as often generational transfer from one generation to the next. That we reach that peak with one generation, and they reach full maturity, and often are as profitable as they've ever been. But the question is, are they going to decline, or are they going to renew? And often it is transfer to a next generation that leads to that renewal. Sometimes it does not, and there's the decline. That's all natural. This is part of every business at one time or another, but it really happens. Now let's take this and let's put some wheels on it for our topic that we're talking about right now. I know there's a lot of text here, but bear with me. We're going to walk through it a little bit. Remember those 5 stages we just talked about? Well, in that left-hand column where it says business stage, you can see those same stages that we just talked about on that graph. But I've added something there, and that is the number of people. This is a rough indication of those numbers of people. It's not hardwired that it's definitely one person or definitely less than 10, but just use that as a guideline, as a rough guideline. But so we've got those 5 categories. And let's look at that, the first column of 1, existence. So what's the structure of that business? Well, very often it's a founder with a plan, or it's that farmer that started this business up and got it going. And then the third column over on the right of leadership needs. So in that setting, what are the leadership needs of that business while it's in that stage? Well, it's a lot of self-leadership and planning. Again, we're talking about this very startup of a business, or maybe only one person involved in this business. You got to lead yourself. You got to do some planning for how we're going to get to the next stage. Well, let's go to that, the next stage. Okay, so we've got some success going on. Maybe there's other family members, or maybe we've got outside employees that are coming into the business. So that structure, that survival level is somewhere employee number less than 10. And the structure is that we've got the founder still probably involved, and plus a few other people who are hustling to make it. And this is classic of entrepreneurs. And then so the right-hand column, but what are the leadership needs? A lot of times that owner and founder is leading production, sales, and relationship building. Again, this applies to farms, could be other businesses too, but leading production, sales, and relationship. You can see this in your farm businesses in that less than 10 employee stage. You got the owner leading day to day. And this is all, it flows, it's natural, it fits in with that startup part of the business, with that existence, with that first level scale. Let's go to the third. You notice the color changes a little bit to some early success, 10 to 20 employees. So still, we got a small team learning to win, still very close to the founder. Leadership needs to be naturally engaged. The founder, leader, sharing success and vision with a larger team. Now, I made this one pink because this is where a little bit of danger starts to come in. Starting to see some red danger coming into this, because not every founder, not every owner is good at starting to share the vision, to communicate with this larger numbers of people. So that's why we see problems with dairy farms and that 10 to 20 employees beginning to happen. And then on that next stage, rapid growth, it's red for a reason. We're talking about 20 plus people. We got the founder at the top of a growing organization. And let's do the math for just a moment here. 10 to 20 people, if I'm the founder leader, I can probably go and personally talk to all of those people, maybe every day, but at least once every week. 20 plus people, I can't do it anymore. I can't maintain that personal relationship with everybody in the same way. I'm likely to need a middle manager level to start developing some other leaders. That's why this is the red zone. That's why we see so many challenges at this size of business. We start to develop some of these specialized functions, HR, accounting, sales, that sort of thing. But that's why that's in the red zone. If a business succeeds beyond that and becomes a much larger business, roughly 40 plus people, we definitely have hierarchies in there at this point, and we've got a very definite professionalization of management that comes in. And that can tend to make things a little bit easier and not so dependent on that founder leader. The point I'm making here, look down that leadership needs column. It changes. And not everyone recognizes this, that as your business changes and grows over the years, you have to change the leadership that you provide for that business. And that's what this is all about. So the leadership that we learn at one stage, we might have to trade some of that in and get some new leadership as we move to the next stages. And sometimes that really means bringing in different people who have some different skills than what we have. Okay, let's jump to the next level, which is leading your team. Again, narrowing the focus a little bit more to a different approach. That is the people that you're leading day to day. So you may be leading the whole farm. That's great. Or you might be a middle manager in your farm and you've got other owners and so forth that are involved. In that case, everyone needs to be thinking about this core area. Farm managers often ask me, where do I start? If I want to do a better job leading my team, managing human resources, where do I start? And that's why I put this together. It's start here, right? This performance triad, I call it. You got to do each of these. The bottom layer in this triangle is expectations. And I'm going to use two words that you've probably heard before. So job descriptions and standard operating procedures. Those are tools that we use to set expectations. Get that clear in your mind. It's all about setting expectations for what you do and what all the employees are supposed to do when they come here. Often that's not done, but those are two tools for us to use. A triangle, then the second leg is training. And all we're doing there in the most basic form is equipping employees with the skills and knowledge they need to be effective in their job. You'd be surprised how often this is not done on farms the way it needs to be done. And then the third leg of the triangle, and hey, if a triangle doesn't have all three legs, it collapses. That's part of the reason I used the triangle here, was that it'll collapse if all three of these aren't here. The third leg is feedback, and I'll say feedback and coaching here. Employees need to know how they're doing, and they need to have good information so that they can change their behavior and improve and get better. We'll talk about feedback and coaching, but I want you to remember that expectations, setting them, training, and feedback. That's the performance triad. So job descriptions. I've been doing HR in agriculture for 20 plus years. And I'll tell you what, job descriptions, you'll hear it from me first, are the most boring thing in the world to do, unless you do it for the right reasons. And this is the right reasons here. I'm not going to get into the details of how to work on job descriptions. I want you to get why first. There's a lot of resources and materials out there. Why is because we have a lot of conflict in businesses and farms that is simply due to confusion. I've worked with farm families, I've worked with top management, I've worked with the entry level and middle people, and so many times there's confusion throughout the organization. And a lot of this can just be cleared up. I remember so clearly facilitating a workshop. This was with a farm family, a large farm that was in significant conflict. And I spent time working through the conflict and building those relationships. But part of it was that they were stepping on each other's toes all the time. We did a flip chart exercise and spent some time together about who's supposed to be doing what and when. And I was putting names of individuals and tasks and so forth up on the flip chart as we were working through that. And guess what we were developing? Job description. Who's supposed to do what and how do they relate to other people? That's what it's for. That's the core part. So get the essential tasks, the skills, knowledge, and attitudes needed in that position. Communicate expectations between the manager and the employees. If you're doing it for those reasons, it's no longer boring and it's exciting about getting rid of some of that confusion so that things can work better in our business. The next one, I'm so glad for things like Farm Now, for the many other quality control programs that have been out there over the years, because I remember when SOPs weren't common in the dairy industry. And when we brought them in, when we introduced this concept, again, it came out of the quality control movement. It helps so much. It helps make training much easier and much more clear. Clarity about to the employees, that helps a lot. It helps. It gives us a lot more consistency. I'm just so amazed when I look at the dairy industry to look at how far we've come in terms of milk quality in the last 20 years. It's tremendous. It's so much better than what it was 2 decades ago. A lot of that has to do with consistency, SOPs, and training around those things. And then, yeah, again, it coordinates and lines up with most of your other quality assurance programs. So if you don't have the SOPs in place, you aren't using them, and they're not, up on the wall from where they were put 5 years ago and covered in manure, get them refreshed and get them up to date and put them into your training programs. So that's the first leg. Let's look at the second leg then, which is training. And again, this is an area that a lot of us think that we're doing a good job, but we've never taken an organized approach to making sure that we're doing an effective job at training our employees in the business. So first off, use an effective trainer. I don't know. I've got a number of producers on there, and I suspect that if I came to some of your farms, that the situation is that when that new employee shows up, that new milker shows up to go to work, the beginning of training is this: hey, go into the parlor with whoever happens to be milking right now and follow them and see what they're doing. And that too often that's the case on every farm. Now the question is that the right person to be doing training in there? Are they even doing the procedure right? And do they have the right attitude about training people? That's anyone's guess if that's your approach to it. I want you to think about training and think about the impact that it has on that new employee, that first impression you're making on that new employee. And one of the first things there is use an effective trainer, someone that cares about it, that's prepared, and that knows that they're expected to train people. I've been on other farms where people were training someone else and they didn't realize that they were supposed to be training this person, so they weren't very effective at it. Ideally, the supervisor should do that. Now, I know that's not going to be the case all the time, but I say ideally the supervisor for this reason, that if the supervisor is doing it, and that's the same person who's going to be giving feedback and holding that person accountable for performance, then the supervisor's got a stake in the training of this new people, and they'll do a much better job of it. Create time and space for training with minimal interruptions. That's all about respect for the employee, and it's all about keeping on focus and getting training done in an effective way. Too often it's interrupted and it's not given the priority that it should have. Don't forget safety training, especially right on day one. We're doing an onboarding project with farms in New York, and one of the things we've built into everything that we do is safety training, but especially on day one, one of the focus areas that we have is that the first day a person sets foot on that farm to work, they should have some basic safety training. It doesn't have to be hours, it has to be minutes, but they ought to know, and the way we've designed that is, what are the top 5 safety concerns on this farm? Top 5, and those are a little bit unique for every farm, but walk through that with that employee. Ideally, walk around the farm and show them some of those safety hazards so that everyone knows what they are on the day they walk on that farm. And then third, the last one there, plan ahead for training. Don't start planning when training is supposed to begin. And I want to build on that with the next item here. This is the training plan. You know, there's something out there called instructional systems design, where you can really put a lot of work and a lot of effort into training and planning for your training. Well, what I've done here is boil this down to a one-pager for training on your farm, especially for entry-level type positions. And this is an example. I've just shown you kind of the basics here. I'm not going to read through all of this. This is a training plan for a milker. And what we've done is identify what are our learning goals or learning objectives. And the whole point here, you might not think, well, that's really, that's what an extension educator might do, or someone at a university or at school. The whole point when we boil down our learning goals or learning objectives is that if I'm going to take time training someone, whether it's 5 minutes or 5 hours, how are they going to be different? What are they going to be able to do when they walk out of this training that they couldn't do when they walked in? If you get that right, if you get those goals right and clear, then you're going to do a much better job of training those people, and they're going to do a much better job of learning because they're going to know what the goals are for our meeting today. So get those right. Be able to perform each step in the SOP is an example, one up there. Then that table in the middle, it's really just helping you break down what I'm going to do for the training. So if you look on that gray bar, so list what are the important knowledge, skills, and attitudes that go into this task. Next, why? Why is that important? And I always encourage people to be trained, not just what. The emphasis on brand new people is more on the what, but we always need to be bringing in the why. And the reason that the why is important with training is all about employee motivation. Think about it. If someone just tells you, if the boss tells you what you're supposed to do, okay, on the first day, that's maybe good enough. But after that, I'm going to be a lot more motivated if I know why it's important to follow this procedure. If I don't know why it's important, then I might just cut corners because I don't really know any different. But if I know why, because the boss gave me the science behind that, or how it will cause harm to the cows, or how it might be unsafe to do it this other way, then I know why, and I'll be more safe and more effective, more motivated to do it that way. The third column then is just getting you to think through, how are we going to teach this? Are we going to show a video? Are we going to practice it in person? What are we going to do? And all this is about just doing a little bit of planning in advance so that you're ready to do a good job when that person shows up for training. And then last is evaluate training. And evaluation doesn't need to be a big deal. The examples here, why is it important to get teat ends cleaned before attaching the unit? My new employee ought to be able to explain that to me. And then you might not even ask a question. You might just observe the learner performing the SOP and just give some feedback. So minimal investment here, but a powerful tool to make you a much better trainer by being just a little bit prepared for what you're going to do. So now when we actually talk about training day, again, so many people have never had any formal background in how to train. And so this is the tell, show, do, review method is an old method, but it's a simple method. And we put it in the form of a flow chart here. So that green block to the top left is where we start with tell, describe the procedure, tell the person verbally what they're supposed to do, show them physically, get your hands in there, show them how to do this task. Do, which is allow them to do it, allow the learner to get in there and try, and you're there to answer any questions. And then fourth, review. You observe them while they're doing the task, you review that, and then the question in that decision block that's yellow, are all steps in the procedure done correctly? If they are, yes, then it's just praise for a job well done. Good job, you've learned this. If they're not all done correctly, we follow that no direction. Hey, we're going to reinforce the parts they did do well, praise for the steps done correctly, and then we're going right back to tell. Those things that need to be corrected, that need to be redirected, we tell, show, do, review, and we use this cycle around and around. It becomes very, very natural for a trainer when they get this in their mind, and we just do this until the employee gets it. That's good for day one initial training. It's good for day 45 when they're learning to advance to the next set of skills that they need in their job. Tell, show, do, review. So get your trainers out there to having that kind of a model in their minds. The next area then is feedback and coaching. And this is the third leg of that triangle that we talked about. So first of all, catch people doing things right, positive feedback. And if we want to change the culture, if we want to make people positive about working here, there's nothing more that we can do than giving feedback. That's the most powerful thing we can do. In fact, I often call this the most important job of a supervisor. Do all your supervisors know that? In fact, sometimes that's another matter. Sometimes our supervisors don't know what their job really is and what they're supposed to be doing. This is job one for a supervisor. Talk to my people, give them feedback on what they're doing. And the most important one is positive feedback about the good things that they're doing. Next, continue providing deeper and more substantial information about why. Keep building on it. We're trying to make experts out of our people. And then ultimately, we're going to use coaching to develop and enhance those skills. And we're going to talk in more detail here about feedback and coaching together. So I like to put feedback into this model, SCORE. And so it's an acronym. And hopefully you can begin to remember that SCORE feedback will help you to do that. In fact, a lot of these tools are available on our website, theagworkforce.cals.cornell.edu, and I've included it at the beginning. I think you'll get the slides, but you can check that out and find a lot of these tools that we're talking about. But SCORE feedback, S is for specific, with details. We don't just tell somebody, hey, you did a good job. What did they do a good job on? Give us some details about that. Tell us what behavior you want to see repeated. Or if they didn't do so, don't tell them they just screwed up. Let's get in there and engage. Let's do the work of a supervisor, the work of a leader, and showing them how to get better. So C then is for credible sources of information. So that you got to be believed. So there's two parts to that. One, you got to at least know the basics of whatever this job is that they're doing. And if someone's new leading a part of a job, they at least need to learn that and understand the basics so they can be a credible source of information. Oh, and you know what it also means? It means you got to show up sometimes for the night shift to see what's going on so that you can be a credible source of information. I know that can be tough sometimes, but you got to show up and you got to have that presence there. It doesn't mean you have to be there all the time. Show up sometimes so you can be credible. Next one is on time and frequent. So two aspects. That's all about timeliness. The feedback can't be delayed. So a lot of you out there have children, right? So picture your 5-year-old who does something wrong, and then a week later, I'm going to come and give my 5-year-old some feedback on their performance, on that behavior. I'm going to have to spend so much time trying to get that 5-year-old to understand what mom and daddy is even talking about. It's going to be wasted. It's never going to work. Well, the same for anybody, same for all of us. I want to know now. If I'm doing something wrong, tell me now. Let me know. Same for our employees. And we saw this in research that we did with employees and how things are going in the farm setting. They want the feedback. They want to know now whether they're doing well or whether they're off track. Frequent, and they want to hear it frequently. They don't want you to wait until the performance review at the end of the year. They want to hear it on a regular basis. relevant to performance. Your feedback needs to be focused on things that are relevant to the job, things that really affect them. And then E is for ends looking ahead. And that is really a key part of it. So always think about your feedback. It's not just done in that time and looking back. It needs to be looking ahead. So end with, okay, so in the future, you can do this better. Or in the future, you can do this, don't do that because that went out of whack. I'm going to give you an example of that. And I think it's more helpful to see kind of a real world type of situation. So 2 examples here. 1, you're getting better at starting new employees. I walked through the barn today and saw that you took time to retrain the new milker Nestor and that you demonstrated the SOP carefully and methodically. Nestor seemed to be improving, and I could see he was being more thorough after you worked with him. How do you think it went? So score, specific. Yes, it talks about what he did. Credible. Yes, I was there. I saw. On time. Yeah, it's happening right after. Relevant. Yes, it's relevant to the work. Ends looking ahead. How do you think it went? Is the last sentence there. He's kind of looking ahead to, opening up a conversation there with Juan. Krista, you need to be more patient and consistent when mixing feed. I watched some of your work today and saw that you were hurrying to get finished. You spilled feed at the mix wagon and had to take time to clean up the mess. Slow down, work methodically, and pay attention to detail. You can do this. Okay, so a little bit, this is redirection feedback, right? We're talking to Krista about some of the things that she needs to do better going forward. But I've got specific details, it's credible, on time, relevant, and does end looking ahead. I've got some positivity. You can do this. I've already talked to her about some of the things that she can do going forward. Now, this is kind of one way for this example. Reality, this is going to be a conversation, but this gives you the flavor of what this feedback can be like. Does this involve a sit-down half-hour meeting? No. This could be 2 minutes in the workplace. This can be sometimes 30 seconds in the workplace. Make sure it's happening on a routine, regular basis. And that's what I want to get at next, is developing the feedback habit. Like anything, feedback is a habit. So we need to develop that as leaders in order to be good at giving feedback. And once you've developed it, once you've gotten good at this, it'll become second nature. You'll just do it all the time. You will coach people on a regular basis. So in this case, it's another tool that's available on the website. This is just a very simple sheet that the idea is for a manager to print this out, one pager, for every week. And each week they go through, for each of their employees, they write down a couple of notes that are strength notes, a couple of notes that are growth notes, things that they could do better, that maybe they're doing wrong or that they could do better, and then some look ahead notes, things, what's some training they might need? What are some of the things that they might be working toward in their career here at the farm? Powerful stuff for feedback. And this stuff, if we start writing it down, and then holding ourselves accountable as supervisors and leaders, it's a lot more likely that this happens. Those of you out there that are supervisors and leaders, I'm talking to you now because I know you've done this. I know you've seen someone doing a good job, and you've made that mental note that you're going to get back to them and give them that feedback, and it never happened. I know the opposite happens. They were off track. I was busy. I couldn't give them the feedback right then, and then 2 weeks went by, and it never happened. That's why we need to get into this habit of collecting it and making time in our schedules to make this happen, because it's the number one job of a supervisor. I want to share another powerful tool with you, and this is the GROW model. GROW model is used by so many coaches, including Fortune 500 executive coaches. And so those of you that have worked with an executive coach, you'll recognize this when I talk about it. But the GROW model is simple. Goal. And the whole point of the GROW model is that you as a supervisor or leader can use this when you're coaching somebody that you work with. In fact, you can use it in a lot of different settings. But the whole point is to first engage in a conversation with the person that you're coaching. Talk about what is the goal? What is the ideal state that we want to get to if everything is going smoothly and well? What does it look like? What does that ideal future look like? And then the reality. Where are we? What is the difference? What is the gap between our present reality and that ideal state? Once we start to define that, guess what? We start to define what the problems are, or maybe what some of the opportunities are. And then O is for either options or obstacles that are in your way, either one. But what are our options to improve? Let's talk about that. Let's think about that. What are some of the things that you could do to get better. And the boss doesn't necessarily tell you all those things. I want the subordinate to be thinking about and fully engaging in a two-way conversation about what are the options? What could I do? Sometimes the boss needs to help seed that, needs to give some hints and clues and try to, help the person along, especially if you're new to this whole process, or the subordinate is new to it. Options or obstacles, and defining some of those things. And then the will are the way forward. So we've talked about this. We've had a good conversation. Let's bring it now down to brass tacks. What are we going to do? What are we going to do differently in the next week to make this change happen? So the GROW model, very powerful, can be used on different time scales. And then, you know what, you as the coach, you also need to circle back on this and hold the person you're coaching accountable for that will part. What were they going to do? What were those steps? And how did they do on those? This is another area that can be uncomfortable, but it's what the job is. Just a couple of notes. It doesn't require expertise, and these questions, they don't have to be leading questions. It's an open conversation. So GROW can be used even when you have expertise. GROW helps you to get buy-in from the other person. So you might know all the answers as a coach already, or you might have a deeper knowledge. You might not know all the answers, but you can help that other person grow and develop, and it makes them feel better about having buy-in or having agency in the solution. So it's less about direct instruction, more about actively engaging the employee, shows your confidence in them, builds trust. You got to be sure to follow up and check in on their progress, and keep notes and be sure you act consistently. This is, there's a lot of software out there on your cell phones. You can keep some notes. There's not a whole lot of reason not to do that. You can keep voice notes and that sort of thing, or you can keep a notebook. But it's important to be consistent. It's important to get to this level of organization and give feedback to your employees. The coaching and feedback habit. It can feel awkward. And that's why I put this picture in there, because this look that this little girl has, that's how some of your employees might look the first time you start giving feedback or coaching. And if this hasn't been a regular part of your practice, you're going to get some of those looks. You got to work through it. You got to get over that, and you will get over it. So start by noticing that good work and offering the positive feedback. And yeah, you might get some of those looks like that. Be transparent about what you're trying to do. Some people are going to be very self-aware, and they're going to ask, so what are you doing? Why are you telling me this sort of stuff? It's okay. It's not a secret. Tell them. You're giving positive feedback. I'm trying to get more engaged in coaching. And tell them what you're doing. There's no reason to hold that back. So two-way conversations as much as possible. Again, just stick with it until that feedback is normal. When you have that environment that you've built where it is normal for people to get positive feedback, it is normal for people to get coaching and maybe some redirective feedback when something is off track, then the employees start to really appreciate, and they start to really value that. And I will tell you, this is borne out by research with dairy employees specifically, that feedback is one of the things that they are most lacking. And it is also one of the things that is most powerful to improve performance. There's a ton of research in this area in other industries too, but I just wanted to reinforce that. We did this with dairy employees specifically, and I found feedback to be powerful. So build it into your management techniques. All right, let's move to leading yourself. And again, in this time that we're living in, it's become more important than ever. But before we even get into that aspect of it, of the pandemic and all that piece of it, let's talk for a moment about time management, because this is a huge part of leading yourself. Some of you have read before, possibly, or at least heard of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's by Stephen Covey. Powerful book. I'd recommend it to anyone to read. But one of the concepts in there is this time management concept, and he uses this quadrant. So this is Covey's quadrant for time management. And you'll notice the left hand, we've got important tasks and not important tasks. And across the top, we've got things that are urgent and things that are not urgent. And so I'll start with quadrant 1. So this is work or things that come into your work life that are both important to get them done or important to address them, and urgent, meaning it needs to happen now. It needs to, it's urgent, needs to happen. The daily work. So that, getting the cows milked, this stuff is in your face on a regular basis. And you don't have to worry about getting to it because it's going to be there all the time. You need to be getting it done. Crises, surely that's something that's really important. Pressing problems, things that just won't go away, that need to be addressed and dealt with, things that are deadline driven, all those things. But this is the core work, really that today's pressing work. It's important. You got to get done. It's also urgent. Everybody understands that quadrant. Let's move to the second quadrant, which is really a critical one. Quadrant 2. So some of this stuff is not urgent. So let me say that clearly. All of this stuff is important in quadrant 2, and it is usually, almost always, not urgent. So in other words, it's not going to be pushing. It's not going to be in your face like the stuff in quadrant 1. Quadrant 2 stuff is things like building relationships with employees, finding opportunities, long-term planning, preventive activities, personal growth, recreation, all those things that are critical. We'll come back to those in a minute. I'm going to jump to quadrant 3. Not important stuff, not important. So why are we doing it at all? But then urgent. And this is stuff, interruptions, emails, calls, texts. Sometimes they're important, a lot of times they're not. Popular activities, things like that. And then over in quadrant 4, we've got stuff that's not urgent and also not important. Some of this stuff we just need to not do from a time management standpoint. We need to get them out of our lives as much as possible. Quadrant 4 stuff, trivia, things that we could get rid of. It's busy work that doesn't require us to be doing that. Maybe we could delegate it. Time wasters, is it social media, some calls and emails, calls from a salesperson that we're just never going to buy from that person. So it's kind of just a waste of our time. Quadrant 4, we're going to get rid of that stuff as much as possible. Quadrant 3, stuff that's urgent, but not necessarily important. In that case, where I've worked with farmers who, the cell phone, the text, in previous years, the radio was always ringing or buzzing, and they could never focus on important matters. I'm going back to quadrant 2 now, because the key to quadrant 2 is it's not urgent. So if you don't make quadrant 2 a priority, if you don't actively work at quadrant 2, if you don't carve out time in your work day to do quadrant 2 activities, they won't happen. In contrast to quadrant 1, which is in your face, quadrant 2 is never in your face. But these are the long-term things. These are the coaching things that we were just talking about that are critical to your success as a leader in your business. So think about quadrant 2 issues and think about building time into your schedule and being away from the interruptions as much as possible so you can work on quadrant 2. Leading yourself then in this, and I'm thinking about it from the context of not just your own personal health and well-being, but also from the fact that because we're talking about human resources, we're talking about leadership, you're responsible for other people. And so we need to be thinking about how we are leading people, what our demeanor is like, and how we can be effective in leading other people. And I put those 2 pictures up there with the young man on the right who's obviously stressed out. How effective is he going to be in that state of mind leading other people? If he comes to work that way and is looking stressed out in that way, people aren't even going to want to talk to him. They're not going to, they might want to ask what's wrong, but they're certainly not going to want to work with him and bring their challenges to him and want to discuss issues and things like that. Whereas the young woman on the right, she's ready for work. She looks like she's got her head right and looks like she's open and positive and ready to go to work and ready to be a leader. But just want to get you this concept in mind that we need to be leading ourselves so that we can be effective at leading others. So maintain a positive attitude. Sometimes that can be tough. It could be really tough now. When you get in front of your people, you got to put that game face on. Even when things are tough inside, you need to put that game face on the best you can and be positive with your employees. Always be looking for what are the positive things that we can work with. Focus on your priorities. That's why we talked about Covey. Focus on priorities. Spend time on those. Take care of yourself. It's sleep, exercise, nutrition, all those sort of things. Folks, if you don't do that, it will catch up with you. You can't go for extended period of times without getting enough sleep or exercise or the nutrition that you need. So in times like this, it's so important to take care of that so you can take care of others. Recreational and spiritual growth, those are things that, again, quadrant two, they're never going to be in your face and pushing themselves. You've got to make time for them. Personal development, even now, it's been busy. Pandemic's been a challenge for me because of the ag workforce, and trying to work with our farmers to be prepared for this and be in compliance. Folks like me need to be focusing on personal development too, to make sure we don't fall into some of these traps. And then last, if you're going to lead people long term, you need to learn to get enjoyment out of that. You need to make sure that you and the other leaders in your business see developing other people as a high priority, as a quadrant two type of activity. And so if you get enjoyment out of that, then it's going to be self-fulfilling and self-rewarding. So I'm gonna wrap it up there at lead yourself. And we've got lead your business, lead your team, lead yourself, and a place that you can go to find some of those additional resources. Thanks, everybody. I'm happy to take any questions that might be there.
Thank you, Dr. Stup. And once again, if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A box and we can ask them directly. While we're waiting for some to come in, I do have a question for you here. I expect a number of our participants share some form of leadership role on their farms, whether it be their parents, siblings, or other business partners. What would you recommend to someone who struggles with friction between the other decision makers and divergent priorities, particularly if they're family?
Yeah, particularly if they're family, because family business, it's got that golden glow around it. It's supposed to be great, but whenever you've been in a family business or worked with them, you know that there can be a whole lot of friction because of all the expectations that family brings to that business as well. A lot of that needs to be the family taking time to identify what their priorities are, what the goals are for those business. We've heard about that longer term strategic planning. What is the mission and vision? A lot of times that's critically important for a business so that we can all try to get as much alignment around some of those goals as we possibly can get. Because I've worked with businesses where we've got very different goals or objectives for the business and for our individuals personally, and we're not talking about those things very much. And when that's the situation, then the horses aren't pulling together in the same direction. So that's one of the things we need to get right first. And then the second part is communicate, right? So that's kind of a specific, those goals and objectives, but communicate with each other on a regular basis, make time for communications, have those meetings, especially among that family group and the leadership team that you have there. And you know what? Sometimes if things are really rough, it's really hard for the family to get through some of those challenges on their own. That's where an outside person, it could be a trusted accountant, it could be a consultant that you hire that's got specific skills in this. A lot of times that outside person can come in and really sometimes just in 1 or 2 sessions work with that family to help to clarify some of those goals and surface some of those issues. One of the things I've learned about conflict over the years, it doesn't go away by itself. It just almost never does. It hides, it festers, and it gets bigger. But if that conflict is there, you know it, and it won't go away until you've dealt with it in some way.
Great answer, and gives us a lot to think about, especially when we're dealing with those conflicts with our family. A question came in from Jessica. Are there any differences in leadership needs cross-culturally as compared to leadership needs or necessities in the absence of a cultural gap?
Yeah, yeah, there are some differences, and I think those differences in leadership needs are as much about style and about communication as they are differences in actual leadership needs. So let me put it this way. So it's specifically, we've got a local American part of our workforce, and we've got often an immigrant part of our workforce. Everybody wants feedback. Everybody wants to hear how things are going. Even those employees that say, no, I don't want to hear any feedback. They almost always do, in fact, want to hear some feedback, especially the positive feedback. Across cultures, then, by and large, and I hate to totally stereotype, but by and large, Hispanic employees are more into relationships and are more interested in getting feedback and building relationship with their boss sometimes than the Americans are. And so those things like providing feedback, like helping people see what the goals are and understand them and work toward them and coaching and that sort of thing, can be amplified. Now, the problem is often we have language barriers and we have communication barriers on the farm that make it harder to have two-way communications. I understand that, and we still have that in so many farms. But it's important to get over those, to find ways to bring in interpreters when you can. Ultimately, the long-term answer when there's a language barrier is for management who's going to be there a long time to have those language skills. That's the ultimate answer, and you don't have to be perfect. You know, I know so many effective dairy managers out there that are pretty good at that farm Spanglish, and they can communicate enough that they're effective and they can build some good relationships. And you don't have to be a perfect language speaker to do that.
Great. So we have another question. What would you recommend to a manager who has repeatedly provided feedback to an employee on a specific task, but you're just not seeing any improvement?
Yeah, that's good. Good question there. So we've got an employee. We're giving them feedback. We've given the positive where we can. Hopefully, we're not just hammering with negative or redirection feedback. We've tried to encourage the good parts of the job as well, so that we're building relationship and all that part of it. But they're off track in some area. We've given feedback, and they just keep repeating it. You know, I'm going to have a sit down with that person. I recommend that you do something different. If you ordinarily give that feedback in the workplace, change it up. Schedule some time with that person to, sit down. Either, if you want to make it more serious, sit down in the office somewhere, because that says a lot. The nonverbals about being in an office or a different place like that. Or if you want to make it a little bit softer, buy them lunch, or bring them lunch, but take that time to sit down, because we've now changed the dynamic. We're no longer in a workplace where it's routine formal things or informal things. Now we've moved it to a different setting, and we've made it a more formal setting. And in that meeting, I'm going to reinforce whatever the behavior is and whatever it is that needs to change. And I'm also going to dig into the why a little bit more. Joe, we've talked about this. How many times? I know you're familiar with that. I know you know where I'm coming from. What's going on? Talk to me. Tell me why is this still happening? A lot of people open up. When you open up like that, a lot of times they'll open right back up to you. If they don't, there's probably something more wrong. There's probably a more difficult entrenched behavior going on here. And eventually, we need to think about consequences that have to happen there. I never want to see anybody get fired. Personally, my philosophy always as a supervisor is that if my employee is unsuccessful, what did I do that I wasn't able to reach that person to help them to develop? So I never want to see someone fail. But the reality is I'm running a business. And if a person is not a good match, or they're just not going to follow procedure, or they're going to continue to be disruptive and harming morale around my business, I'm going to have to take action, because I am managing the business, and I've got to have people that are on board that are going to be positive parts of the team.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I don't see any other questions in the queue, Dr. Stup, but thank you for speaking with us today. And if you want to see any of the materials, I believe we can get that link for you. It's also on the Cornell College of Ag and Life Sciences website. So we can get that to you. Just send a note to one of the NMPF staff, and we'll put you in touch with Dr. Stup if you have direct questions for him as well.
All right, great. Yes, thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
With that, I'll turn it back over to Teresa. We're going to move on to pub trivia. The coordinates have been put in the chat. If you can move over there, we'll get that kicked off. Teresa?
Thanks, Tony. And Richard, thank you for your presentation and for sharing your breadth of knowledge about the ag workforce with us.